The first question came in during Blake's presentation, and the question was from me, Kyung Lu of City of Oakland. What factors are considered in efficiency?
I usually use coefficient of performance, which is a 1800s way to look at things. So, which is just energy out over energy in. So, for a furnace, for example, or a hot water heater, like a basic one, they're at about 78 to 82% efficient. So the COP would be 0.78 or 0.82. For a heat pump, the efficiency, the COP is about 3.5 or 4. It can be higher. So the efficiency is about 350 or 400%. What I tell people is that an efficiency over 100% breaks the first law of thermodynamics. But the reason that it's that efficient is because it's not just putting electricity in, it's pulling heat from the outside air. It's basically using a pump to pump heat in that is in the outside air as long as we're over 0 Kelvin. So you can use SEER and convert it. They're different. We use different units of efficiency for gas versus heat pump equipment, but that's basically the way it is. On the induction side, I actually looked at a recent Frontier report about induction cooktops versus other cooktops, and was pretty blown away that when you boil water, a gas-fired cooktop, which is what I have at my house, is only 30% efficient because a lot of that heat's lost to the outside. So that's where I use that one versus an induction being around 100% efficient. I hope that answers that.
Sounds great. Thank you. The next question came in during Joe's presentation. What tools did you use to calculate your GHG emissions savings?
Yeah, so we use a variety of tools, and to be honest, this would be a question better for Fatima. She was definitely kind of in the calculation method where I was overseeing more at the program level. But because our electricity was coming from direct access, we did have some challenges kind of figuring out what the source emissions calculation would be. So we basically used the worst case scenario in terms of source emissions for our calculations built into that. So, you know, when we have building management and power monitoring tools on our campuses, we're actually able to see at the boiler level, at the chiller level, even at the system level for certain air handlers, et cetera, how much electricity and or gas that they're using, convert that into MTBUs, give it a carbon value associated with those actual sources as best as possible, or the worst case scenario if we couldn't find that information, and then run that calculation. So there's like a 30-page or 30-sheet spreadsheet that we have. We didn't subscribe to a specific ISO or other type of calculation method because we had such kind of unique sources. Obviously, if we were partnered with PCE or partnered with another agency that's providing more renewable energy, that sourcing component would have been a lot easier to calculate.
Great, thank you. This question is from Tom Cabot. As part of meeting building air health issues and energy savings, are you exploring heat recovery ventilation for buildings?
I assume that question is kind of more for me on the operational side. Yes and no. Heat recovery ventilators are good in some circumstances, not in all circumstances. Particularly in our drier campuses, College of San Mateo and Kenyatta College, that's a potential application. But at Skyline College, where we have a lot of marine layer fog and moisture in the air in general, actually energy recovery ventilators are a little bit better for that potential application, with those potential heating and cooling sources. So we are looking at it. It's one of many approaches and technologies that we're thinking about, and it is one of the things that we have built into our design standards. We have a protocol that when there is a replacement of a piece of equipment over a certain value, that it needs to go through a total cost of ownership process. That's a life cycle cost assessment tool that we use, as well as and then abide by at least the Title 24 regulations be Energy Star regulated, have a SEER value of a certain number, et cetera. So we have kind of the system of checks in place that allows us to not subscribe specifically to one technology, but to look at a variety of technologies and or approaches and weigh them against each other and on a case-by-case basis. So that just that process and the method and procedures that we have built in is really important for our facilities management team and for operational maintenance budgeting purposes, right? So we have all those asset management tools. We have a life cycle cost assessment built out, or at least some basic life cycle cost assessment metrics built into each one of those pieces. And then when there's the time comes and we're planning for that replacement, then we can enter into that algorithm the appropriate technologies to either replace that specific widget or the constellation of widgets that surround it. So you always have to think of these things as systems and not be prescribed to a specific technology. That's how we approach it.
That's great. Blake, this one came in during your presentation. What about the cost of panel upgrades and the capital cost story?
I included that on the water heater side. I mean, I think there was another question: is this residential or commercial? I noticed that a lot of the municipal building hot water heaters are residential style because most municipal buildings don't have a lot of hot water use. Most of our homes use more hot water than, say, a community center just because of showers. So it's a very similar story. So I included the panel upgrade, which is maybe 1,000, 1,500 typically for a resi style hot water heater. You might not even need that on a municipal building. I did not include that on the air conditioning because, sorry, on the heating side, because if you add an air conditioner in our climate zone, typically it's driven by cooling rather than heating when you size your compressor. So the size of the panel to serve the compressor for air conditioning already takes care of that panel upgrade. So there will be one if you decarbonize but don't plan to air condition. But if you have an air conditioned system, which I think is going to grow, it's the same load. Luckily, that's not true in like Maine or Alaska, but luckily it happens to be true in coastal Cal.
Great, thanks. There's another question. Someone says, I'm curious about concerns about the high global warming potential, the GWP, of current refrigerants with the proposed mass conversion to heat pumps. Do either of you have any comments on that?
I'm sure Blake can speak to this a lot more in technical detail, but I'll just say that refrigerants are a big concern to our organization, not only in terms of their greenhouse gas emissions, but also the safety of our faculty, staff, and students and people that occupy the buildings. So we have a very stringent refrigerant maintenance program in place. We are, really looking hard at refrigerant replacements, and particularly eco-friendly refrigerant replacements wherever possible. There's a bunch of different R401A type numbers that we could talk about, but I'll leave that to Blake.
Thanks, Joe. I thought you could answer there as well. It's becoming an increased conversation. I actually see a lot of movement towards systems that we used to call inefficient package systems, because all the refrigerant is inside a manufactured box rather than a split system, which has refrigerant lines that could leak. So that's one way to decrease that. I can't believe I haven't done the calc and don't have the chart for you right now, because I've this for years. But I do want you to think, first of all, refrigerants have undergone a huge change just in my career, from refrigerants that deplete the ozone layer to refrigerants that don't. They're now undergoing a new change. So I would say by 2030, it should be less of an issue. And the one thing I want you to consider, even though the global warming potential is much higher for refrigerants than burning gas per mole, refrigerants you charge once and they're supposed to not leak, and maybe you recharge them in 6 years or something. So that volume is very small, whereas gas is just like a constant thing that never stops. So I think, I don't have the chart in front of me, so I can't get, it's still, we got to get rid of the gas first, but we definitely have to think about refrigerants. Really important question.
Great. And last question for both of you, sort of short answer, but where does the contractor community stand regarding the decarbonization of public buildings? Are they ready? Are they totally rocking on this, or is it needing to gear up in the way it seems like with residential?
That's a really tough question. I can only answer on the residential realm from my own experience. As a homeowner, I think there's a fair bit of way to go there for contractors specifically, a lot less for designers actually. In the commercial world, and at least for us and the vendors that are that have approached us, um, electrification, decarbonization, LEED super platinum green, whatever it is, like that's totally in their lexicon. It benefits them to work on those projects. That's the way things are going. They see that as a portfolio builder. They sometimes even ask for that and or to edge that way. But it does matter a lot in terms of the project delivery method. Who is really responsible for the outcome in terms of the carbon performance or otherwise of the building. So if it's a hard bid project, low bid project, if it's a design build project or, lease back, all those different procurement methods have advantages and disadvantages, but the more integrated the process can be between design and construction, the more likely that sustainability outcomes are going to persist. When you just that handoff between the architect to the contractor and then the contractor to the operations team, as the fewer steps there are between that, the better off there you are, in my experience. That's not to say that the design build project or other integrated design project delivery methods can't go sideways. They certainly do. That's part of the democratic process that those projects rely upon. But that's a really important consideration in terms of project procurement that some don't necessarily factor in when thinking about decarbonization.
Oh, thank you. I think we'll leave it there. Joe and Blake, thank you so much. This has been really informative. There are a couple more questions that have come in, and if you want to go to that panel and type in any answers, that will be great. But thank you. I'll turn it back over to Denise.
Thank you so much. That's great.